Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Marney Andes. Marney is a born and bred farm girl from Wallace, Nebraska. She is a speaker, consultant, educator, and entrepreneur who has dedicated her career to supporting teams and individuals as they develop and grow. She's written a new book called Start with the Give Me Shots, 8 Homegrown Lessons for Business and Life. In the book, she shares the life lessons she learned from her father and how they grounded her and helped her create the life she wanted. I'm excited to have her on the show and talk about this really special book. So Marney, welcome.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you on the show. And I'm really excited to talk about this book and this project you've been working on. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about the book. The book was written to honor your father and all he taught you. So tell us a little bit about your father.
Well, my dad was I tell people he had a really robust personality. And I've actually talked to folks about the fact that people say that I inherited his gift of gab. I inherited my mother's looks, and it was a great combination for me to actually benefit from. But my dad was, my dad was a really great storyteller. He was very connected within the community. He just had a way of sitting and visiting with people and just loved to hear their stories. My dad was also known for telling a good joke here and there. And he certainly was someone you could just sit down with coffee and just chat it up. So I really, was able to sort of recall a lot of the lessons that he taught me. Certainly there's more than 8. I tell everyone that too. Happened to be like the 8 core lessons that I've really drawn from. My mother too was very influential in my life, but he was just a big guy with a big personality, and people just really loved him.
And you lived on a farm. I mean, you were a farmer.
Yes.
So, yeah. What type of farming?
So we farmed mainly corn and wheat. And then my dad also, although he called it a hobby, it turned very much outside of a hobby into a very big business at the time, by the time he passed away. But we raised purebred Angus cattle. And so when he passed, had a herd of about 600 of them.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I was in 4-H. My brother and sister were in 4-H. We grew up doing that kind of thing, showing cattle and just sort of being in and around the farm.
That's great. What a great, we're going to talk a little bit about where you come from and how that's important, but what a great, it's like a story childhood, right? Growing up on a farm in Nebraska, right? And that, what a great launching point for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think people don't expect that either. And what I found is, through sharing that, which I didn't share my whole life. I didn't always share that I grew up on a farm, and it wasn't for any other reason than I just I didn't think that would really matter. But what I have found is when I do share that with people, I either find people that grew up very similarly to me, or people that are just genuinely interested of like, what was that like? I grew up in a city and, we didn't leave our doors unlocked, or, I have no idea how you would have possibly graduated with only 15 kids in your class, but I have. And I think that's what's so interesting, which is why it's one of the lessons in the book I talk about, which is that everyone should be super proud of where they come from.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's, you've had a really interesting career. I was getting ready for this podcast, and so you were a college athlete, you assumed the title of Mrs. America. You had a successful professional career, and you founded Project Aspire, which is a nonprofit to support women in their pursuit of higher education and leadership opportunities. So how much of the success in your life has been as a result of the lessons from your father?
Well, I've just attributed so much of the success, probably the majority of the success. And a lot of those things that are all woven together, all the moments that you shared just now with your listeners of the things that I've accomplished in my life. I look back at it as I was just willing to learn and grow. I love to learn how to do something new. And, many times that's what it took. I was willing to work really hard. I mean, certainly that's pretty apparent when people are playing college athletics, really athletics at any level. I mean, I don't want to negate the fact that high school athletics are really tough too. So I think, a lot of that is sort of woven together. That, assuming the title of Mrs. America I didn't know a lot about competing in pageants, but I learned what it took to compete in pageants and did it. And then there's just sort of like this undercurrent of probably a competitive piece of it, but also just you could try and do anything. And that was the one thing that I think my parents did really, really well without actually saying it was, it doesn't matter where you were raised. It doesn't matter that you come from this very simple community or this very simple life. If you want to do something, you can pursue it. And they didn't actually ever say those words. I don't really recall those words, but the environment in which my parents created in our home with myself and my brother and my sister, really, that was just sort of the unspoken current that sort of went throughout our household, which is you can do anything you want if you learn how to do it.
Yeah, it's apparently, because you've done so much, so you've had quite a broad range of success in your career. So that's so it must have been something that you picked up over that upbringing. So let's talk about the book. Start with the Give Me Shots. Now, who is it written for, and what do you hope people are going to get out of this book?
When I started to write it, John, I actually was trying to figure out how to write it for myself in some sense. I was, through my work, I do a lot of leadership development. The teams that I lead do a lot of development within the corporate environment. I've almost stepped into certain roles where I'm providing executive coaching to other leaders that I'm working with. And what I found was I was in some way, shape, or form sharing a lot of these concepts with folks through conversation. If I was trying to provide some sort of strategic planning presentation for folks, if I was trying to help them understand, like, why we should do something and not this over there. And I would always draw from these. So at first it was like, could I just put these ideas to paper? Could I actually make sense of what are the lessons? How do I talk about them? What order would I talk about them in? And after I started writing and really digging into it, I found that had I written this to my younger self, had I had this early on in my career, that would have been incredibly rewarding. So I do think that, folks, in their early career, mid-career would absolutely draw a ton of knowledge from these lessons and be able to apply them right away. But since the book has launched and I had invited a few people to read it beforehand just to provide some feedback, and that very intentionally, I asked people to do it, men and women, different ethnicities. I added different age groups. I really wanted the feedback. And what I found was there's this sort of universal sense from folks that there are these lessons that are within all of us. And folks really did resonate with the lessons I shared. They may have been called something different when they were growing up, or maybe they learned it from a different person. But the essence of just having lessons that have been with you your whole life, but maybe you haven't tapped them, or maybe you forgot about them, that seemed to hit home for everyone who read the book. So I think that gives you sort of a sense of who would benefit from it. And quite frankly, the opportunity to be able to speak to folks that are trying to navigate a career, I think these are some really powerful lessons for them.
Oh, that's great. And I even saw there was a quote from somebody from New York City who read the book and it resonated with them. So you took it from a farm in Nebraska and you told stories that resonated with somebody, in a city. So that's
Right.
pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's neat. So let's in the book you talk about your father's the lessons that he learned. You pick on these 8 lessons that you tell, but you name the book after lesson 2. So why is the book called Start with the Give Me Shots?
Well, when I was writing that particular lesson, it was so vivid. I mean, I could smell the smells of that many years ago. I could just feel everything around me in the environment. And it happened to be also a story I've told many times. I've told it with teams I've led. I've told it with friends that I've had. I've sat on calls working with the CEO of our organization and actually described why starting with the Give Me Shots really matters, not only to everybody who's working on his leadership team, but to the business itself. And what I found was that was the one that just really grounded me. It was also just a really fun term that was unique to my dad that I thought was really special to be able to have on the title of the book. And really the third piece, when I was working with my publisher and they were, we were trying to spitball ideas on what would be the title now that we know that these are the 8 lessons. And we just couldn't get away from it. It was like every time we turned the corner, it was like, it has to be Start with the Give Me Shots. I just don't know what other title makes sense. So that's really sort of where we landed on it. And I think, again, the principles within that lesson itself are really powerful. So it makes sense that it's also the title of the book.
Yeah. So let's talk about that one lesson. Let's stick with lesson 2 there. So what are the Give Me Shots? What did your father mean when he said that?
Yeah, well, it's actually a story. I played basketball. In fact, I played any sport I could play when I was growing up, and I ended up playing basketball in college. And I remember this one fall afternoon when I had decided just to come out and shoot around on the basketball hoop, and our driveway that he had. Quite frankly, as much as everybody thinks he poured that driveway for the new farmhouse, it was really to pour that driveway for the basketball hoop that he wanted for his kids to be able to play on. And so I'd come outside and I was just randomly shooting these shots. I mean, I'm talking like launching them from like the 3-point line, and there was no rhyme or reason about it. And he was in the far pins, actually feeding the cattle. And all of a sudden I hear him yell up to me, "Marn, start with the give me shots." And he had said this to me before. And what the give me shots were to my dad were the shots that were like 2 feet away from the basket on each side and then right in front of the rim. And I remember that day when after I'd chased the ball all over, shooting from the 3-point line, he came up and met me and just said, "You've got to start with the give me shots.
Yeah.
And once you get through the give me shots, then you could make your way outward." And really for him, I mean, he was pretty adamant about it. In fact, from that point forward, I shot 100 shots from each side and in front before I ever took another shot. And that was at home shooting around. That was in the gym during regular basketball season and practice. I mean, it was really, anytime I went to camps, I did that too. And his belief was, if players, in fact, took the time to get so good at the give me shots, not only would they be unstoppable if they were put pressure on them, they would make it more times than not, but then they would also be able to continue to hone that shot and move farther away from the basket and still be really successful. And so the way I've applied that to my life and business is get really good at what you do well. Get really clear on what your fundamentals are that make you extremely unique in your craft, in your career, whatever that may be. Businesses need to get super clear on what makes them unique, the fundamentals that make their teams unique. And the idea is to practice those every day. And what I think too many times people do is they say, "Hey, I'm really weak in this area, so I need to work on that." And I tell people, I still work on weaknesses. I still want to make myself better in some of those areas. But when I do something well, even if I'm at the best at it compared to the rest of my peers or within the context of wherever I'm living career-wise, that's even more reason to practice that every day, because you want to be so crisp. You want to be so good at those things that you can draw from them whenever needed, and you're going to be really, really good. And so I'm a believer in the fundamentals. I think if you do the fundamentals really well and your teams do the fundamentals well and your business does it, then when you want to get creative, when you want to innovate, all those things become way more possible because you're so good at the foundational principles for which you can be successful.
That's great. I mean, we were talking before we started the show. I was a naval officer on submarines, and we would practice the same things over and over. They were drills, casualty drills, flooding, fire, reactor scram, missile problem. We trained and trained and trained to where we didn't sort of think about it anymore. It was just, it was muscle memory. We reacted. And then when the casualties piled on top of each other, it was no problem because we knew what to do because we had practiced the fundamentals over and over again. I think that's what made us so resilient to, the type of battle scenarios we would run into. And so we just were well practiced. We practiced the fundamentals over and over and over again. So, and it became natural to us, it became muscle memory,
Right. And I think about the year we just had and what we're still doing amidst the pandemic and COVID-19. I think about my own team. I mean, we were asked by the organization to really step in and help support this movement into telemedicine. I work for a healthcare company. I've worked in that space for a while now. And, I had people ask me, like, how is your team able to so quickly pivot and do those things and be able to put things out that maybe other teams weren't able to do? And I said, because we work these fundamentals all the time. And I think about our fundamentals that set us up for success. I mean, we were already collaborating online. We already had processes in place in which we knew how we designed and how we kept the teammates at the center of it all. And so when we were asked to basically help train all of our physicians across the country on telemedicine, it was like, okay, well, we just need to get a platform up and running. We need to learn the different platforms themselves so that we can adequately teach. But all the other logistics behind the scenes that was maybe making other teams scramble, maybe other industries scramble. We didn't have to do that.
Right.
So I talk to people about that too, that's really the reason why the fundamentals are so incredibly important, because then when you're met with challenges or
Yeah.
things that disrupt you that you hadn't anticipated, you can rely on those foundational principles, and your
Right.
team and you individually can pivot much more easily than you would if you weren't practicing those all the time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I think in the submarine analogy, we knew what each person was going to do without them saying it, just because we were used to doing it. And these were in scenarios where we're wearing masks and there's fire hoses and everything. We just knew what to do because we had practiced so many times. So we as a team operated uh, that way, not just one person, but as a team we operated like almost as one unit because it was so well practiced. So it sounds like
Yeah.
your team did the same thing during the COVID crisis. So
Yeah, we did.
that's really good. So, we were talking a little bit about one of the lessons in the book is be proud of where you came from, and obviously you come from from a farm in Nebraska, and you've done all these things, and you kind of kept those lessons with you. What about some other people that might not have that be proud of where you came from? They may not have had that strong family connection, a father that applied all these lessons. How can you still be proud of where you come from if you don't come from the type of background that you've come from, or like for myself, I grew up in a small town in New England, and I always kind of go back to those are my roots, and that's who I am as a person. But how do others how can they deal with it if they didn't come from that kind of a background?
I think it's a great question. I talk to people about it's being proud of the story that you have, being proud of
Okay.
where you've come from too. So there's a physical piece of it, which is, perhaps where you were raised or how you were raised. But then
Right.
there's just the story that you've built throughout your lifetime that I think people in some cases maybe shy away from it and aren't proud of it. And I will give you an example. So one of the things that obviously is on my bio, you introduced me this way, is being a collegiate athlete.
Mm.
And I had a full ride scholarship. I went and played basketball at a Division II school in Nebraska. And I played 1 year. I played 1 year because I didn't have a great experience. And I decided to leave after that 1 year, transfer to another university. I was asked to walk on. I was asked to come back at one point and was given, be given a full ride scholarship. But because of the pain of that story and that pain of that experience, I didn't go back. And I will tell you that for the longest time, I really regretted that, because I said to myself, then you really weren't a college athlete. You only played 1 year, yeah, you had a full ride scholarship, but that isn't that big of a deal. And actually, the more I talked about that and more about like what my story is, I would find other collegiate athletes like that. My
Yeah.
husband's one of
Yeah.
those. He played 2 years of men's volleyball at Ohio State. I've
Mm.
met other people that played 2 years volleyball over
Yeah.
here. They played 1 year and they ran track, or they did this. And it's interesting because all of a sudden we're like, we felt bad about it for so long that like something meant that we
Yeah.
didn't accomplish something. And I will tell you that I now am very clear that that is my story. My
Yeah.
story isn't one of playing 4 years. My story is one of playing 1 year, having a really tough time at it,
Yeah.
not having the best experience, but I want people to learn from that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's incredibly important, that people know that that's where I came from.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what has made me me, and has absolutely driven other opportunities in my life because I remember that experience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's more of this overarching theme of be proud of the story that
Yeah.
has brought you to this place, whether it was incredibly exciting and loving, or if it was really, really hard and
Right.
disappointing.
I agree with that. In fact, I just was thinking about it because I put this in my latest book about the hero's journey. The tough times that we go through. When you go to a movie, right, or you read a great novel, there's always a hero that has to overcome, all this challenge that gets put in front of them, right? It's Lord of the Rings is a great example where there's a hero, young hero that has to bring this ring to this mountain, and everything goes wrong, and they have to overcome, and we're really attracted to the hero as they go through this pain and through this trials, and then they come out, on top. Of course, in Hollywood, everything ends, with a good story, and they win. But the hero's journey is what makes us interesting, right? We all go on that hero's journey. We all go through some really rough times in our lives, whether it's where we grew up or an experience in our lives that really, was a very traumatic experience or what have you. But I think the more of those that we have in our journey, I think it makes us a more interesting person, and it creates a, I don't know, a more compelling character in ourselves, because we've
Right.
had those, we have the scars from some past experiences, and I think it really makes us to be a more, makes us a more interesting person. I think of, you know, a boring life, right? You could have not gone through any trials, and then you have, but you're not that interesting a person not having gone through some of those experiences. So I think you're right. I mean, what our story is, it's our story, right? And all those things make us who we are. All those challenges, all those, even the good and the bad, make us who we are.
Right. I mean, it's authenticity. I mean,
Right.
people being able to step in and say, that's my story, that's who I am, that's what's, led me to make these choices, or this is,
Right.
why I act this way, or why I behave this way, why I have these preferences, if you will.
Right.
And
Right.
I think a lot of it too is, it's not just to have the courage for us to each share our stories. I mean, obviously you're sharing your story through your new book, and probably your first book. I'm sharing my stories through this, and we have way more stories beyond
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I think it's for all of us to not only be willing and have the courage to share it, but to create this space where other people feel like they can share their authentic stories as well.
Mm,
And that to me is like, that's the power of the lesson. It's, yes, being really clear and honest about what your story is, but you've got to create this environment where other people feel like they can share their story as well.
yeah. Yeah. I like that. I really do. I think it's important. And I think too, and the beauty of this book is that you're telling stories. And I think people are attracted to stories, and I think they can learn those lessons better through stories. So I think that's it's nice that you wrote the book this way, because I think people are going to be attracted to those stories, and they're going to learn it better because they've heard it through your eyes, right? Versus just, a bullet point list of things you should do, right? I think stories, I think we come from a long line of storytellers, right? So we're humans are attracted to stories, and I think your this book being written like this, I think it's gonna teach more lessons than if it was just a bullet point list of things to do in your career. So I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to teach any other way. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always told, whether it be teams that I've led or other folks that I facilitated development opportunities for, I've always said, like, I have to share with you what I've done and where I've either
Mhm.
had really great success, or where I've fallen flat on my face, because, that's how I learn. I appreciate people being open and honest about that. I appreciate them saying, like, here's the real deal. This is how I
Right.
did it.
Right.
Or this is what I tried to do, and it didn't work out so hot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe it took me 10 years to figure it out. I think the realistic view of it is also incredibly important. And I talk about that, the collection of stories. I tell everyone, the real at the heart of it is that it's simple. I mean, these are very
Mm,
simple lessons. And I try to paint that picture of not only how I learned them and how I think they can apply them, but they're not easy. And I think that's where people get caught is, I want this sort of easy fix. And these aren't easy fixes, because these are the
right.
life lessons. These are the things that, you recognize that they're important. Maybe it takes you a few years to figure that out. Maybe it
Yeah.
takes you a
Yeah.
lifetime to figure that out.
Right.
But they're not easy to practice. And so really, where the biggest ask of the reader is, take time to practice it, and know that you'll always be practicing this. I
Mm,
mean, my husband and I talk about it, there's never going to be a mastery checklist for us. I'm
right.
never going to just be like, oh, well, we got it. I mean,
Right. Right.
communication, we figured it out. I
Right.
mean, oh
Right.
man, we know exactly how to raise our kids. I mean, we're like in this big jumbo experiment right now. And we
Right.
have to be willing to try some things, fail at those things, learn from them, be honest with ourselves, be honest with our kids, be honest with our friends, family, coworkers. I mean, that's what this life experiment
Yeah.
is in my
Yeah.
mind. And so I feel like these are the ways that you can ground yourself instead of over analyzing too much information. It's like, these are a simple view of it, but it's still
Yeah.
going to be hard, but you can do it if you practice them.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like what you're saying, because I think it's really important, especially from a leadership perspective, is authenticity, right? As being a leader and being a person, being real with your team. So I think a lot of leaders, especially young leaders, think they have to be a certain way, right? We have to
Mhm.
act a certain way. I'm a leader now, so I have a corner office, and I have to, I have to be stoic, and I have to say everything's going to be great. We're going to be fine, and I don't think we want to be led by robots that have all the answers. We want to be led by authentic leaders that have a story, that have not always succeeded, that are willing to say, I made a mistake, I made a wrong decision, but I think we need to shift our strategy and move in a different direction. I think when you're working for a really authentic leader, you know it, right? You know that they're real, and you know that you can trust them because they're giving you you get real, you get the good and the bad, right? It's not always like, a good story every time. So I think being, having an authentic life and being an authentic leader, I think is a powerful lesson as well.
Right. I've worked for both. I've worked for leaders that really struggled with this, and I've worked for leaders that have been incredibly good at this, and certainly have modeled my view on leadership and how I've led teams, which is, I tell people sometimes it's not easy to tell the truth. Sometimes it's really hard
Right.
to tell people that you've messed up, or that you've
Yeah.
done something that, maybe you're not proud of, or that you need to, go back and fix. But I think it's one of the most powerful things that leaders can do, especially early leaders, like to your point, early in their career, is be willing to admit those mistakes, be super honest with people, and ask for the feedback so that people know that it's safe to be honest with you for themselves as well. So that you just sort of create this environment. And I also think early in their career, from a leadership standpoint, to show authenticity means you ask a lot of questions. You're inquisitive. You want to learn more. And that's because you're genuinely interested in the authentic side of others.
Yes.
And if you model that, that can be incredibly powerful. It may seem like it's almost, you look around and go like, is it really supposed to be that simple? It is. But if you create that kind of environment, and I certainly, the team that I have right now is, we do a lot of work, and it's intentional. So just because we model it or we facilitate it, we also do what we ask others to do. So we are constantly in coaching engagements. We're constantly doing, cohort work where we actually get together and do peer focus groups, and we do peer coaching. I think that's the kind of behavior that as a leader, you can model it, but also engage with your team in doing it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it's great. I think authenticity builds trust too, and respect. And I think those are some things. If you're genuinely interested in other people and their lives, they see that there's a connection there beyond just a boss, worker relationship, right? You treat them as a person, you treat them with respect, and they see that. And I think people respond well to that. So yeah.
Agreed.
So one of the lessons your dad talked about was always trying to find a win-win solution, and I think you describe a time when you had a win-win solution wasn't possible, but you learned a lesson as well through the experience. So tell us a little story about trying to find a win-win when it didn't seem like that one existed.
Right. Well, where I've heard people talk about this concept's quasi, somewhat close to what I have is, it's like, oh, you need to find this compromise. It's like, where can you meet in the middle? And what I learned from my dad is that's not always the case. Really, if you just focus on always creating a win-win solution, what that may mean is, John, if you and I are working on something together, the win-win may be that I work 75% of whatever that project is, and you work 25%. But because of the nature of the relationship, it actually makes sense for us to do that. And if we can, the end result ends up being this, fantastic output that we're actually to help a client or whatever that looks like, that's a win-win for both of us, even if it feels like I took the brunt of it. And I think people forget that because they think like, well, what's in it for me and what's in it for you? And if you're not giving me enough, and I really look at it, especially when I navigate, a new organization. Certainly I've changed, my employers from time to time. I'm working for what's the right fit for me. And many times when I go into a new organization, that's what I'm trying to figure out is, how do people win in this organization? How do they find success? How do they really impact the business in a positive way? And you start to figure out what the relationships are, what you have to do to have and create win-wins. And so, I'll give you an example in the workplace, and then I'll certainly give you an example in a personal space, which is, in the workplace, our team has an opportunity to work with so many different groups within the organization. In fact, it's really nice to be a wanted team, quite frankly, because of the nature of the work that we do. And, I always share with the team that sometimes it may feel like, gosh, we just don't have enough capacity to take on this. But if you look at the long game and say, but if we were to do this specialized project for that particular team in this part of the organization, it might set up, the roadmap for work that we might do for the next 2 to 3 years. And that would be really important. So are we willing to maybe feel like we're a little exhausted and a little overworked for the win that we would have down the road. And then we
Right.
talk about it. Because
Yeah.
in some cases we might go, you know what, it's not worth it. And then we go, okay, it's not worth it. So we'll know that that wouldn't have been a win-win. So we'll move on. But in other cases, we might say that it is really worth it.
Mm.
I think this can absolutely be used in relationships. And in fact, I think it actually needs to be applied more so in our personal
Right.
relationships,
Right.
because I think people maybe tend to hang on to relationships because they don't know what to do with them. And that's a hard position to be in. I've been in that position before. But if you can think about it as, you know, what do I need to win in this? And if I'm the one that's always working on this relationship, or I feel like I'm the one that's always having to overextend myself, and maybe that's just not feeling so great anymore. First of all, tell that person,
Mm.
can we meet in a better place so that we both have a really great experience? But if that person isn't willing to do it, then it becomes your litmus test to say, you know what, it's not that that's a bad person. That's just not a great win-win relationship for
Right.
me. And
Right.
so now it's time to move on. And now it's time to say, like, how do I use that as the litmus test of who's in my circle moving forward?
Right.
And it's okay to move on. It's
Yes.
okay to say somebody who's maybe been my friend or somebody that I've stayed connected with for the last 20 years, maybe they're just not that right relationship for me moving forward, because
Right.
I've met
Right.
other incredible people. So
Right.
you know, my dad used it in a lot of ways, from a, you know, who was he going to have relationships with? Who was his business partners of, you know, getting the best cattle or his, you know,
Yeah.
machinery
Yeah.
fixed? I mean, he really thought about like that. And a lot of times he'd say, I'm going to do this for a couple of times, but if it feels like I'm the one that's only doing the work here, then
Yeah.
I'll move on and find someone else to do that work with.
Yeah. That's neat. Yeah. That's neat. I just, the way you talk about your father, I just, it's almost like a storybook time, like a time before we had social media and we had cell phones and we had, you know, we worried about how many likes we had on Instagram, right? He was living a very genuine life and, you know, raising a family out on the farm, having those personal, real relationships with people in the community. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we almost miss that these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of running. I mean, the young people today are, you know, they're chasing likes on their devices and they're doing TikTok dances and what have you. And it's like, they don't have those genuine, I think they miss out on some of those genuine relationships. It sounds like what your father had and experienced and what you saw growing up as well.
Right. Well, I mean, the community itself, I'm very, very grateful for the community of Wallace, Nebraska. I mean, everything was very much centered on
Yeah.
really the kids within the community. And so we, you know,
Yeah.
there's always a running joke of like, if we ever made it to the state tournament, which was always 4 hours away in Lincoln, Nebraska, that's where the state tournament was held when I was in high school. And we say it was like the burglars free for all in Wallace,
Right.
Nebraska.
Right. Everybody be gone.
Nobody ever locked their front door and everyone was gone because they were there, you know, watching the state tournament and supporting. And I still believe we can have that. I don't know that you have to live in a farming community to understand why that's important. I think the concept of community
Yeah.
can actually be achieved even though we're in this age of likes and social media.
Yep.
It's intentionally slowing down and actually giving ourselves permission to not be overscheduled. I find, since living in the city, and I remember, you know, the first time when my oldest, who's 16 now, when he was probably like midway through elementary, I remember this concept of play dates being introduced to me. And I was like,
what
my
is
play
this?
date growing up was like, you showed up at somebody's house and was like, hey, you know, I remember my best friend, she lived in town when I was growing up. And I mean, it was mostly like, hey, can Heidi go play? I mean, so that it would be like, is somebody dropping me off in town, or can her mom and dad bring her out to the farm? I mean, it just wasn't so complicated, even after games. I mean, I think about this too, like, even though you would have been at the gymnasium all night and everybody would have been wiped out. Of course, there was always a cake raffle at halftime. So you might just follow the person home that had the cake.
Yeah.
Just be like, you know, they didn't care if their house was clean. They didn't, you know, it didn't matter that it was like 10 o'clock at night. You got together. And I believe we can still have that. I think we've just been caught up in this, like, everything has to be perfect and everything has to look amazing online. And it just,
life
that's
isn't
not real.
No, life's not like that, right? Life's not perfect. Life's not, you know, everything is perfect and neat and orderly and tidy. No, I mean, I think that's the same thing with relationships. They're messy, right? People are messy. As a leader, that's one thing I've learned, is that people have all sorts of different backgrounds and experiences, and they come to problems they look at things completely different than I do. And I think I think as a leader, we have to be able to have that flexibility, be able to deal with all sorts of different personality types and try to get the most out of every, every employee's operates just slightly different, right? And just you have to find the ways to motivate them the best. Some people do need a kick in the tail, and some people need encouragement, and some people just leave them alone and they're going to do great things. But you have to know that as a leader, you have to have that relationship. But people don't come cookie cutter, and they don't, they come with a lot of problems and challenges and issues, and so do I. so every time, you have that relationship, it's real, it's authentic, and it's sometimes messy. So, and I think that's what life is, But I think you still find those opportunities where you can win, they can win, the company can win, and all these things can combine, and actually, you can create an environment where people like to come to work and they're respected and they're listened to. I think those and as far as why I do this podcast and why I write my books is I want to create those environments. I want leaders to create those environments where people like to come to work and they're respected at their jobs and treated with respect. I think that's something that in a lot of cases are missing in a lot of big corporations. So I think that,
I agree a ton. And I think one thing that you've even hinted at too, which is, it's nobody's cookie cutter. And I think too many times, what leaders can really learn from, what, employees, and quite frankly, the last few organizations I've worked for, we intentionally call them teammates, which I love because I do believe it's a team sport of how you do the work together. You can over architect it so much so that it doesn't even have a realistic view. Like if I try to tell leaders or other folks that I'm working with, let's just talk about it as if we were sitting in a coffee shop visiting about it. Like let's not try to get overly analytical around it. Now, some cases some things you need to be really conscientious of, and yes, you need to be thoughtful around those. But I think in some cases where you're saying like, how do we create an inclusive environment? How do we create an environment where everybody feels like they're bringing their best self to work and feels like, quite frankly, they can bring their authentic self to work? Ask people. I mean, isn't that a monumental idea? Ask the people that are working in your environment what that would mean to them, and the magic will happen there. Too many times we think we have to sit in boardrooms and do this thing in isolation and make all these decisions, when really asking the questions of your people who work with you, so many of the answers are there. I am a huge believer in crowd sourcing and the wisdom of the crowd and the wisdom of our people in our organization, because they're the ones doing the work and they have some of the very best ideas for what could catapult our business further.
So listeners of this podcast, that's a familiar theme. So they'll recognize that right away because I talk about that all the time. I agree with you 100%. So that's as a young leader, I used to think I needed to have all the answers, but as a seasoned leader now, I realize I just have to have the right questions, and all the answers are right there in the team. So
I'm using that, John, because I love that. It's absolutely, you don't have to have the answers. You have to have the right questions. I love that.
Yeah. Steal it. So that's really good. So this is exciting. This book is really neat. I love how you, have taken the stories from your childhood, the lessons from your father, and weaved into these stories that can help people manage their careers and make the right decisions for their life and the things that they want to do. So I think that's really powerful. So congratulations on the new book. I'm really excited for you. How can people find out more about this book and more about you in general?
Great. Well, the book is live now. It's available on Amazon. So you can simply search for Marney Andes book or start with the Give Me Shots. You'll find it there where you can order it. And they can also connect with me at marneyandes.com. One of the things that I am continuing to do is write about concepts that maybe weren't necessarily in the book or additional stories that didn't make it into the book. And one of the things that is really, really important to me, and we've talked about it already, which is the sense of community. And I really believe that if there's any time like the present to start creating not just a connection with one another, but a deep connection with one another. And that's part of the work that I'm starting to put out there, which is how do we do this through asking the right questions? Asking thoughtful questions rather than just, how are you doing, John? Oh, good. How are you doing, Marney? I mean, really getting to the place where we're exploring, concepts together, and really it's nothing more than our own opinions and our thoughts. So if they go there, they can sign up for my newsletter, and they'll also see more writing and other things that I'm sharing.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put links to that in the show notes so everybody can find that. And I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm excited for you in this book. And again, I just encourage people to look it up. It's on Amazon. We'll put a link to it. It's Start with the Give Me Shots, 8 Homegrown Lessons for Business and Life. And I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. It was great to have a conversation with you, and I can't wait to pick up your book too.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.